What would you do if you came home from a family funeral to find that your wife had thrown your entire $430,000 vinyl collection into a dumpster during a July heat wave? I'm Harold, and for 50 years I'd been building the perfect record collection: rare Blue Note jazz pressings, signed blues albums from the 1940s, test pressings that maybe 10 people in the world owned. My wife Beatrice always hated my music. She called it hoarding old plastic, while she filled our garage with rusted metal sculptures that she claimed were worth millions. While I was away burying my brother, Beatrice decided to surprise me by converting my climate-controlled listening room into a yoga studio. She didn't sell my records. She just tossed them into a rented dumpster and let them melt in 95-degree heat for 4 days. When I found my life's passion destroyed, Beatrice laughed it off as decluttering and told me I should be grateful for the space. You're watching Betrayal HQ, where destroyed passions become perfect justice. If you're new here, we share the real stories of people whose most treasured collections were destroyed by those closest to them, and how they got their revenge. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell, because Harold's response will teach every collector watching to never underestimate a man with nothing left to lose. I didn't yell or scream. I waited until the week before Beatrice's big gallery debut, the show that was supposed to launch her art career. While she was at a spa preparing for her moment of triumph, I sold her entire sculpture collection to a scrapyard for exactly $100. But destroying her art was just the beginning of what I discovered. The smell of old vinyl and the soft crackle of a needle finding its groove had been my sanctuary for 50 years. My name is Harold, and at 70 years old, my listening room was the only place in the world that truly felt like home. Every album was carefully cataloged and stored in climate-controlled conditions. First pressing Blue Note jazz records from the 1950s. Signed blues albums from legends who died before most people knew their names. Test pressings that maybe 10 people in the world owned. The insurance company valued my collection at $430,000. But to me, it was priceless. My wife of 8 years, Beatrice, hated every single record. She called it hoarding old plastic and complained that the room took up valuable space. Beatrice fancied herself a sculptor, though her idea of art was welding together pieces of rusted metal she bought from construction sites and junkyards. Our garage overflowed with her twisted iron masterpieces, and she'd rented 3 storage units to hold the rest. She financed her hobby with our joint savings account, spending thousands on raw materials that looked like industrial waste to everyone except her. "Your music is just noise, Harold," she'd say. "My sculptures are real art that we'll appreciate and value." The tension between us had been building for months. Beatrice wanted to convert my listening room into a yoga studio and meditation space. "You need to move that junk to the basement," she demanded over breakfast one morning. "The basement is too humid. It would destroy the vinyl in 6 months." Beatrice set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink. "Harold, I'm serious. I need creative space, and you're hogging the only good room in the house. Those records are worth more than your car, Beatrice. I'm not risking them for your yoga hobby." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Hobby? My art is going to be featured in a gallery show next month. When my career takes off, you'll be thankful I had the vision to invest in real culture." She stood up and leaned over the table, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "One way or another, Harold, that room is becoming mine. You can cooperate, or I'll find another solution." The threat hung in the air like smoke. I'd never heard that tone from her before. That night I installed a better lock on the listening room door. My brother Thomas called from Ohio with devastating news. His cancer had taken a turn for the worse, and the doctors weren't optimistic. "I need to see you, Harold, while I still can." I booked a flight for the next morning. The trip would take at least a week, maybe longer depending on Thomas's condition. As I packed, Beatrice was unusually affectionate. She brought me coffee in bed and helped me choose clothes for the trip. "Don't worry about anything here," she said, kissing my forehead. "I'll take care of the house while you're gone." At the airport, she hugged me tighter than usual. "Take all the time you need with Thomas. I'll keep everything perfect for when you get back." Something in her tone bothered me, but I was too worried about my brother to analyze it. Before leaving for the airport, I made sure to lock the listening room securely. Looking back, I should have hidden the spare key too. Thomas passed away peacefully on Thursday morning, surrounded by family. I'd planned to stay through the weekend for the funeral, but I couldn't bear being away from home any longer. I caught an earlier flight and arrived home Friday evening instead of Sunday. The house smelled different when I walked through the front door. Lavender and fresh paint hung in the air instead of the usual mustiness. Beatrice wasn't home, which was unusual. Her car was gone, and there was no note. I walked through the house, noticing small changes. New throw pillows on the couch, a different arrangement of furniture in the living room. Then I reached the hallway that led to my listening room. The door was wide open. My legs felt weak as I stepped into the doorway. The room was completely empty except for a purple yoga mat in the center of the floor and a full-length mirror mounted on the wall. The custom shelving that had held my collection for decades was gone. The climate control system had been ripped out. My entire life's passion had vanished. I stood in the empty room, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Maybe she'd moved the records to storage temporarily. Maybe this was just part of a renovation surprise. I called for Beatrice, but the house was silent. I checked the basement, the garage, every closet. No records anywhere. When Beatrice finally came home 2 hours later, she was carrying grocery bags and humming cheerfully. "Harold, you're back early. How was the funeral?" "Where are my records?" Beatrice smiled brightly. "Oh, I did us both a huge favor while you were gone. I finally cleared out all that clutter." "Clutter? Where are they?" "I had them hauled away. The dumpster company picked them up this morning." My vision tunneled. "You threw away my records?" "I donated them to charity. Well, technically I put them in a dumpster, but the garbage men probably found good use for them." She pointed toward the driveway where tire tracks marked where a large truck had been parked. I ran outside and saw the neighbor across the street. He confirmed that a waste management truck had emptied a full dumpster that morning. The records had been sitting in a metal dumpster for 4 days during a heat wave that reached 95 degrees every afternoon. Vinyl warps at temperatures above 70 degrees. After 4 days in direct sunlight, my collection would be nothing but melted plastic slag. I called the waste management company. The load had already been dumped at the county landfill and buried under tons of other garbage. 50 years of collecting. First pressings were thousands of dollars each. Irreplaceable recordings by dead musicians. All of it was gone forever. When I came back inside, Beatrice was arranging flowers in the newly painted listening room. "Harold, I know you're upset, but you need to think about this practically. Those records were just taking up space, and they weren't making us any money. They were insured for over $400,000. She rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop exaggerating. It was old plastic, Harold. You paid maybe $5 each for most of them decades ago." She gestured toward the garage. "My sculpture collection is worth 20 times what those records were. You need to start appreciating real art." The complete lack of remorse in her voice was breathtaking. I didn't yell or scream or throw anything. I simply stopped speaking to Beatrice entirely. I moved my clothes into the guest bedroom and began eating my meals alone. When she tried to start conversations, I ignored her completely. "You can't give me the silent treatment forever, Harold. You're acting like a child." But I wasn't sulking. I was researching. I spent hours reading state laws about marital property and asset division. Since we'd been married for 8 years, and Beatrice had used our joint savings account to purchase all the raw materials for her sculptures, they were legally considered community property. That meant half of her art collection belonged to me. And if something happened to my half, well, that would be my decision to make. Beatrice was so focused on her upcoming gallery show that she didn't notice my sudden interest in legal documents. Her big break was scheduled for Friday night, a solo exhibition at the prestigious Morrison Gallery downtown. The opportunity came when Beatrice announced she was going to a 3-day wellness retreat to prepare her spiritual energy for the gallery opening. "I need to cleanse my aura before the show," she explained, packing crystals and meditation cushions into her suitcase. Before leaving, she handed me a typed list of chores. "Clean the garage thoroughly so the moving crew can load my pieces on Friday morning. They need clear access to everything. Pierre from the gallery wants the installation to be perfect. This show could launch my entire career, Harold." She kissed my cheek like nothing had happened between us. "Try not to be too grumpy while I'm gone. When my art starts selling, you'll understand why I had to make space for creativity." After her car disappeared down the driveway, I walked into the garage and really looked at her masterpieces. For the first time, twisted pieces of rusted iron welded into abstract shapes. Some were 10 feet tall and weighed hundreds of pounds. To my eyes, they looked like expensive junk. I called my old friend Sal Rodriguez, who owned Rodriguez Scrap Metal on the other side of town. "Sal, I need a favor. Can you bring your biggest truck?" Sal arrived the next morning with a massive flatbed truck and a portable scale. "You sure about this, Harold? Some of these pieces are pretty big. It's going to take some work to load them." I showed him the bank statements proving that our joint account had purchased all the raw materials over the past 3 years. "It's legally half mine, Sal, and I want my half turned back into cash." Sal walked around the garage, examining each sculpture with a professional eye. "Well, it's definitely scrap iron. Some steel mixed in. A few pieces have copper accents. That'll bring a better price. What do you think for the whole lot?" Sal pulled out his calculator and did some rough math based on current market prices. "I'd guess about 6,000 pounds total. Market's pretty low right now for ferrous metals, maybe 16 cents a pound. So around $900. More like 100, Harold. Market's been terrible lately." I looked around the garage at Beatrice's life's work. Pieces she'd told gallery owners were worth thousands each. $100 for all of it. That's the honest price, my friend. I could lie and say more, but scrap is scrap. Load it up. It took 4 hours to load everything onto Sal's truck using a small crane. The largest piece, Beatrice's self-proclaimed magnum opus called Industrial Dreams, took 3 men and a lot of swearing to wrestle onto the flatbed. When the garage was finally empty, Sal drove the loaded truck onto his portable scale. 6,200 pounds of mixed ferrous scrap metal. At current market rates, the total value was exactly 103. "I'll round it down to a clean 100, Sal said, handing me a crisp bill and a receipt that read mixed ferrous scrap, $100. I swept the empty garage floor until it was spotless. Then I taped the $100 bill to the wall where Industrial Dreams had been displayed, along with a note written in block letters. "I decluttered. You're welcome. Harold." I spent the rest of the day reading peacefully in the living room, waiting for Beatrice to return from her spiritual retreat. Beatrice came home Thursday evening, glowing with wellness retreat energy. She'd had her hair done and was wearing a new dress for tomorrow's gallery opening. "I feel so centered and ready for my big moment," she announced, floating through the house like she was walking on air. "I'm going to check on my pieces and make sure everything's ready for the movers tomorrow morning." I heard the garage door open. Then I heard a scream that sounded like a jet engine taking off. The screaming continued for a solid 30 seconds, followed by the sound of someone frantically searching through empty space. Then thundering footsteps as Beatrice ran back into the house. "Harold, what did you do?" She burst into the living room, her face purple with rage, and her carefully styled hair wild from running her hands through it. "Where is it? Where's my work? Where are my sculptures?" I calmly pointed toward the garage. "I left you a note explaining everything." She spun around and ran back to the garage. I heard her ripping the note and the $100 bill off the wall. When she came back, she was holding the money like it was evidence of a crime. "You sold my art? For $100? I sold scrap metal. Here's your half." I held out a $50 bill. Scrap metal? Those were original artworks. They were worth thousands. Actually, the open market valued them at exactly $100. I have the receipt if you'd like to see it. Beatrice called 911. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers stood in our living room while Beatrice paced back and forth, gesticulating wildly. "He stole my art collection and sold it. This is grand theft. I want him arrested." Officer Martinez, a patient man in his 40s, looked at the paperwork I'd prepared. "Ma'am, according to these bank statements, the materials were purchased with joint funds from a shared account. But I created the art. I welded it. It's my intellectual property." Officer Torres, his partner, examined our marriage certificate and the property records. In this state, assets purchased during marriage with joint funds are considered community property. Your husband had legal right to dispose of his portion. His portion? It was my art. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter between spouses. We can't make any arrests here." Officer Martinez handed me back the documents. "You might want to contact a lawyer about property division, but nothing criminal happened here." As the police officers left, Beatrice was already dialing her attorney's number. "Pierre, it's Beatrice. We have a problem with tomorrow's show." My phone started ringing early Friday morning. Pierre Dubois, the gallery owner, was having what sounded like a nervous breakdown. "Harold? Is this Harold? Your wife gave me your number. She says her sculptures are gone? The moving crew is here, but there's nothing to move." I could hear Beatrice crying in the background. "There's been a change of plans, Pierre. The artwork is no longer available." "Not available? Do you understand what this means? I reserved my entire gallery space for a month. I printed catalogs. I invited collectors." Pierre's French accent became thicker as his panic increased. "I have 50 people coming tonight expecting to see revolutionary industrial sculpture. What am I supposed to tell them? I'm sure you'll think of something." After I hung up, Beatrice snatched the phone from me. "Pierre, listen to me. We can postpone the show. Give me 2 weeks and I'll create new pieces." I couldn't hear Pierre's response, but from Beatrice's expression, it wasn't encouraging. "You're canceling the show? But this was my big break, my career." She ended the call and turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You destroyed my life. I decluttered, just like you did to me." Beatrice moved out the same day and filed for divorce on Monday morning. Her lawyer also filed a lawsuit claiming destruction of intellectual property and demanding $2 million in damages. My client's sculptures were individually appraised and insured as fine art, her attorney explained during our first mediation session. She's seeking compensation for the full appraised value of the destroyed works. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Walsh, asked to see the appraisal documents. The paperwork showed each sculpture valued between $15,000 and $75,000, with a total collection worth $2.1 million. "That's interesting," Patricia said, "because my client has a receipt showing the actual market value." She slid Sal's receipt across the table. "Mixed ferrous scrap, $100. Beatrice's lawyer stared at the receipt. "This is outrageous. You can't value fine art based on scrap metal prices." "Actually," Patricia replied, "we can. That's what the open market determined these pieces were worth when sold to a qualified buyer." The mediator looked confused. "Mrs. Beatrice, how did you obtain such a high appraisal for these works?" That's when things got interesting. Patricia decided to dig deeper into the appraisal documents. Something about them didn't look right. The appraiser's signature looks odd, and the letterhead seems off. She hired a handwriting expert and a private investigator. Within a week, we had explosive information. The appraiser, someone named Dr. Angela Foster, didn't exist. The signature was forged, and the letterhead was fake. But more damaging, Patricia found Venmo transactions from our joint bank account to the real appraiser, a man named Carlos Vega. Beatrice had paid Vega $5,000 to create fraudulent appraisal documents. She'd used my own money to fabricate evidence against me. "Harold, this changes everything," Patricia explained. "Your wife committed appraisal fraud using marital funds. We're not just defending against her lawsuit anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means we're going on offense. Insurance fraud is a felony." The next day, Patricia filed a countersuit accusing Beatrice of fraud, forgery, and theft of marital assets. But we were just getting started. Patricia's investigation uncovered something even more shocking. 3 days after selling her sculptures, Beatrice had filed a homeowner's insurance claim reporting that her art collection had been stolen. She was seeking $2.1 million in compensation from our insurance company. "She's trying to double dip," Patricia explained. "Sue you for destroying the art and collect insurance money for the same pieces being stolen." The insurance adjuster, a thorough man named Frank Torres, came to interview me. "Mrs. Beatrice claims someone broke into your garage and stole approximately 3 tons of metal sculptures." I showed him Sal's receipt and the photos I'd taken of the empty garage. "Frank, the sculptures weren't stolen. I sold them legally as community property. Here's the documentation." Frank stared at the receipt. "So when your wife filed a claim for stolen art worth $2 million, she was lying. The art was sold for $100 with her knowledge." Frank made careful notes. "Mr. Harold, I need to inform you that filing a false insurance claim is a felony. We take fraud very seriously." "I understand. I'm not the one who filed the false claim." Frank nodded grimly. "No, you're not. But your wife is about to have a very bad day." The insurance investigation led to another bombshell discovery. Frank's team found that Beatrice had been renting 3 storage units around the city, all paid for with our joint checking account. When they obtained search warrants, they discovered something incredible. The storage units were full of expensive artwork, but none of it was created by Beatrice. She'd been buying paintings, sculptures, and ceramics from other artists, then welding small pieces of scrap metal to them and claiming them as her own original work. "She's been running an art fraud scheme for years," Frank explained. "Buying legitimate art, modifying it slightly, and then selling it as her own work at inflated prices. How much money are we talking about?" "She spent over $200,000 of your joint funds buying other people's art. Then she was selling it to collectors as original Beatrice Hartley sculptures for double or triple the price." My wife wasn't just a bad artist. She was a criminal. The criminal investigation expanded when the IRS got involved. Beatrice had been claiming her sculpture sales as business income on our tax returns for 3 years, showing steady profits that made her look like a successful artist. But the sales were fake. She'd been buying her own art back, using my money to create the illusion of commercial success. This is called wash trading, and it's illegal when used to deceive galleries, collectors, and tax authorities. The IRS discovered she'd avoided paying taxes on nearly $150,000 in actual income while claiming false business deductions for her art supplies. Your wife owes the government approximately $45,000 in back taxes and penalties, IRS agent Timothy Brooks informed me. Fortunately, Mr. Harold, since you filed joint returns under duress and can prove the false information was provided by your spouse, you're not liable. But Beatrice was looking at serious federal charges in addition to the insurance fraud case. Her high-powered attorney suddenly became unavailable when she couldn't pay his retainer anymore. I'd frozen our joint accounts on Patricia's advice. Pierre Dubois sued Beatrice for breach of contract after her gallery show disaster. The Morrison Gallery had lost $15,000 in advertising and preparation costs, plus damage to their reputation. Other galleries in the city blacklisted her after word spread about the insurance fraud investigation. Local art collectors who'd previously bought her work were demanding refunds and threatening their own lawsuits. The art world is smaller than people think, and news travels fast. Within a month, Beatrice went from rising star to complete pariah in the local art scene. She'd moved into a cheap apartment and was working at a coffee shop to pay her legal bills. Meanwhile, Patricia had compiled evidence that would make the divorce proceedings very simple. Harold, your wife destroyed marital assets worth over $400,000 when she threw out your record collection. Under state law, you're entitled to compensation from her portion of the community property. What does that mean practically? It means you're getting the house. 8 months after Beatrice threw away my records, we finally had our day in divorce court. Judge Theodore Valdez reviewed the evidence with obvious distaste. Mrs. Beatrice, you destroyed your husband's property worth over $400,000, then committed insurance fraud in an attempt to profit from your own criminal activity? Beatrice's public defender tried to minimize the damage. Your Honor, my client was emotionally distraught about the marriage and made poor decisions. Poor decisions? Judge Valdez held up the evidence folder. Your client committed fraud, forgery, tax evasion, and theft. These aren't poor decisions. These are felonies. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Since Beatrice had destroyed premarital assets worth more than half our community property, I was awarded the house, both cars, and all remaining bank accounts. Beatrice got nothing except pending criminal charges. As we left the courthouse, she looked at me with defeat and exhaustion. I hope you're satisfied, Harold. You got your revenge. I didn't want revenge, Beatrice. I wanted my records back. Since that's impossible, justice will have to do. She walked away alone, and I never saw her again. I sold the house within 2 months. Too many bad memories lived in those rooms. I bought a small cabin on the lake about an hour outside the city. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a perfect room with good acoustics for listening to music. The insurance settlement from my destroyed collection gave me enough money to start over, though I couldn't replace the irreplaceable items. I was browsing a flea market on a Saturday morning when I found something that made me smile for the first time in months. Buried in a cardboard box of dusty albums, I found a beat-up copy of Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, the very first jazz album I'd ever bought as a teenager. The cover was worn, and the vinyl was scratched, but it was the same pressing I'd owned 50 years ago. I paid the dealer $5 and took it home. I put the old album on my cheap turntable and settled into my comfortable chair. The needle found its groove with a familiar crackle and pop. The scratches added texture that the pristine version in my destroyed collection had lacked. Miles Davis's trumpet filled the small cabin with that perfect melancholy that only comes from a lifetime of playing the blues. For the first time since losing my collection, I felt truly at peace. The music wasn't perfect anymore, but it was real. It was mine, and nobody could take it away from me again. I sat in the fading afternoon light, listening to jazz and watching boats drift across the lake. Beatrice was probably in prison by now. The insurance fraud charges had been serious, and the prosecutor wasn't interested in plea deals. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel guilty about how completely her life had unraveled. Then I remembered coming home to find my life's passion melted in a dumpster, and any sympathy disappeared. She'd had a choice. She could have respected what mattered to me. Instead, she chose to destroy it and laugh about the destruction. I'd simply shown her how that felt. The music played on, and for the first time in years, I felt completely, perfectly content.